Okay, I was debating on a number of different topics to talk about today. There's a couple things on my mind that I think I'll get out in video form. But one of the things that I think is interesting is, we have this concept that, there's never been a vegan culture ever to survive, uh, for more than a generation, basically. And it's something that people often point out that veganism is basically an experiment. It's kind of funny. The vegans will point out and kind of claim that, humans could not have been meat eaters because we lack, sharp claws or fangs to chase down our prey, and that, tool usage is not appropriate. We shouldn't use tools to obtain our food. And, it's kind of interesting as they sit down there and suck down their smoothies, uh, which obviously there were obviously Vitamixes, 2 million years ago, where early humans could have processed the greens and fruits and nut butters that they obtained from, 4 different continents, back then, sure. But it's interesting, when we go back and look at human evolution, and, this presumes that you believe in evolution. I know there are a lot of people out there that do not agree with that, but I personally feel that that is a fairly legitimate hypothesis anyway. And so if we use that framework, it's not entirely true that there were no vegan humans, or I should say subhumans at least, because there actually were some. So if we look back, into this human evolution, there are some people would estimate around 7 million years ago there was a common ancestor, of which modern, great apes and humans split from. And so first we think the orangutan line came off, and then the gorilla came off, and then the chimpanzee came off, and then finally the humans, diverged from that. And so as we look into what is thought to be human evolution, we go back to the Australopithecines, which around 4 million years, 3 million years seem to be present. We'll be familiar with Lucy, who is an example of Australopithecus afarensis, discovered in eastern Africa, I think in the area of the Oldupai Gorge, it's a region that I've actually visited, and a lot of people call it sort of Olduvai, but it's actually Oldupai, which was a mispronunciation of the way it's written, in the Tanzanian location. It refers to a type of flower that's flowering in that region of the Rift Valley in eastern Africa. And so as we see these Australopithecines, which incidentally, it's thought now, we talk about early tool usage, and there's something called Oldowan technology, which is simple stone, flake tools, and that later advanced into something later called Acheulean technology, which probably was utilized by likely Homo erectus. But anyways, we go back to these Australopithecines. So we see that there was something called Ardipithecus, which was also considered an Australopithecine, but it hadn't quite developed some of the more quote-unquote human-like traits. We saw bipedalism occurred probably before we became human. There's different thoughts of advantage for that. But what's driving most of this evolutionary change was something called the Quaternary cooling period. And so about 3 million years ago, the Earth cooled off dramatically, probably something like 6 degrees Celsius. The scientists are very much worried about a 1 to 2 degree change as for global warming, but we had a period where we went through about a 6 degree drop in temperature, and that changed sort of the lush tropical environments that many of the primates were thriving on. The chimpanzees, the pre-hominids, living in the trees, getting calories from fruit and other vegetation, probably a small amount of insects, and also probably a small amount of animal life, as chimpanzees are known to do today. They'll hunt other monkeys or small deer or other animals when they can get them. And so that was going on, and then this quaternary cooling event occurred 3 million years ago, and that dramatically changed the landscape. Again, this is over a period of thousands of years, and so we see the forests and tropical environments becoming increasingly replaced with grassland and savanna. And so as there's less and less food available, the creatures have to now figure out how to ambulate between tree grove to tree grove initially, and so the bipedalism probably was an advantage at that point. As the grasslands further expanded, there were a number of attempts. Remember, there were a lot of dead-end human attempts out there, and so we see some of them. And one of them, or actually two of them, there's something called Australopithecus robustus or Australopithecus boisei. Some people call them paranthropus, meaning sort of outside of human. These guys made an attempt to do it the vegan way, and so they were primarily plant-based. They responded to the change in vegetation. Now they had the grasslands and the brush, so they had very robust jaws. And Australopithecus, or Paranthropus boisei, was known as Nutcracker Man for his incredibly strong, powerful jaw, and probably because they were chewing on the stems and the sort of the woodier grasses to get nutrition, kind of like what a cow might do today. And so they did that. The problem with those guys, these early human or parahuman vegans, is they ended up going extinct about 1 million years ago, and so, or 1.5 million years ago. And so we saw the attempt at veganism by primates or early pro-hominids or hominids, and it failed. We just don't have we didn't have the necessary adaptations to do that. And so what instead sort of survived was going into the more carnivorous line. And so as the Australopithecines discovered tool usage, remember, tool usage actually predates humans. So this is interesting. And we know that we can see other animals that use tools. Certainly chimpanzees, orangutans, and other primates already use tools. We know that things like crows and dolphins and octopus will all use tools. So tool usage is not uniquely human. And we do know that stone tools even predated this Oldowan technology. There's another type, and I'm blanking on the names. Maybe some of you guys can fill us in. But we think that the Australopithecines use that. And then Homo habilis, who many people designate as the first true human, although that is even still debated. Some people still think that Homo habilis was a Australopithecine. But clearly there was a gradual shift into more humanism as the brain grew, as we became better at using tools, and clearly the tools were used not as Vitamixes or blenders, but to butcher animals. And so probably started out scavenging animals. That is probably a likely scenario. And so we have these Australopithecines, later Homo habilis, following maybe big predator cats that as they come upon their kill, they would leave a lot of meat behind. Some would estimate 10 to 20 kilos if we look at what a modern lion will leave on, say, a zebra carcass. And so these animals would have had access to meat. Probably it was, the hindquarters, the muscle meat, and then they would eventually figure out how to crack the bones to obtain some of the marrow. They might crack the skulls to get some of the brains to hit some of their fat requirements. So as we have this scavenging go on, with Homo habilis and Australopithecines, eventually we get into Homo erectus. Now, Homo erectus is now reaching near modern human height. Some people estimate some of them stood as tall as 6 feet, whereas the Australopithecines, like Lucy, were about 3'6". And so we see, generally, as a population gets a greater, more nutritious diet, they become taller. And so this is one of the things we see. We see increased brain capacity, brain growth. We went from a 400 cc brain with Australopithecus and chimpanzees all the way up to about a 900 cc. Maybe some people even estimate up to maybe possibly 1100 cc's with Homo erectus. Homo erectus became very efficient at hunting. They developed spear technology. They likely included possibly stone tips on their spear. It's possible they did that. They were very proficient at hunting megafaunal animals like elephants, mammoths, and mastodons. And they ranged out of Africa somewhere maybe around 1.5 million years ago as they left, transitioning across Eurasia and into Asia. So we find some of the early Homo erectus fossils in Asia dating back to 1 million years plus, and things like Java Man and Peking man are examples of some of those. And the Homo erectus fossils have been found all over Europe and Asia and the Middle East, and so, and even into Africa. And some people call Homo ergaster, maybe the African version of Homo erectus. And eventually, Homo erectus likely transitioned into something called Homo heidelbergensis. These things apparently, again, there's a lot of interbreeding and migrating in and out of Africa that is occurring, and a lot of crossbreeding, obviously. So eventually those were thought to have led to the Neanderthal or Homo neanderthalensis, and eventually the modern Homo sapien. And somewhere in there, Homo erectus probably evolved into the Denisovans, and then possibly even Homo flores, which is called the Hobbit man, which was found on the island, the Flores Island out in Indonesia. And so eventually the Denisovans possibly intermixed with Homo sapien, and then they ended up migrating out to Australia, becoming the first Aboriginals. And so Homo sapiens and Neanderthals lived together in Europe for an overlapping time of tens of thousands of years. The last Neanderthal is thought to have went extinct maybe 40,000 years ago, though there's some evidence they may have been around as late as 25,000 years ago, based on evidence in a cave in Spain. The Homo erectus probably passed on at around 140,000 years ago. And so we had this period of time where we had humans that were hunters, meat eaters. They developed the tools. We had a attempt at a plant-based hominid, after the quaternary cooling period, which did not last. And so we've seen the vegan attempt. It's a failure. The fact that we have processed food and we have tools that can grind up our plants, allow us to do some of those things, allows modern Homo sapiens to not die. They can get sufficient calories because of that, but that's not how we evolve. It's not who we are. Ultimately leads into many problems with health deficiencies, and that's why we see so many problems with veganism. We'll continue to do that. So anyway, this is just a little bit of a review of evolution with a general outline. There's obviously contention about what exactly happened, but that's generally how many people think it went and played out. So we are a meat-eating species. We evolved because of tool usage. We evolved because of meat eating. That's who we are, and that's who we'll continue to be. We will not change our biology over the next 50 years by feeding everybody fake meat products and plant-based, highly processed food, which is what is being attempted to do to us. So anyway, keep that in mind. Remember who you are as a species. We're not going to change that. We do need to continue to work on making agriculture efficient, sustainable, and as humane as possible. But we do not and cannot get away from that. We cannot get away from who we are. We cannot escape our biology. That only leads to illness, sickness, mental disease, and frustration. Okay, guys, enjoy being human. Enjoy eating meat. Embrace it. Celebrate that. Do not for 1 second allow someone to guilt you into thinking there's something wrong with who you are as a person, as a human being. That's who we'll always be. And we need to remember that. And we need to fight back with everything we have, just as much as we had to fight to kill the first mammoth. We need to fight for who we are as a species and not let someone try to take that away from us. Okay? All right. Take care, guys. Like, subscribe, leave your comments down below. Anyway, hope you guys are having a good day. Take care.